You know, if it's not about sports, I find it very hard to concentrate.
Hi guys, Braden here, and today is episode number 10 of Dead Stadiums. The subject is the Astrodome, which is located in Houston, Texas. To give a little disclaimer here, the Astrodome is technically still standing as of 2025, but was closed in 2008 and has not been in use since then, nearly 2 decades ago. Much like Aloha Stadium, which I did a video on, it technically isn't a dead stadium per se, as it hasn't been demolished, but it kind of is a dead stadium because it has been completely abandoned. Either way, I think it qualifies for this series, so let's get into it. In order to explain how the Astrodome came to be, we must first talk about Roy Hofheinz. Hofheinz was a county judge and a former mayor of Houston. He was a career politician, but in 1959, he joined the Houston Sports Association, or HSA for short, a small group of investors that were trying to lobby the National League for an expansion franchise for the city of Houston. So why would a lifelong politician who had only ever worked in the political sphere want to switch careers in his mid-40s to the sports industry? Well, the truth was he had always been a fan of the game of baseball, often taking his family to minor league baseball games. But due to Houston's subtropical climate, those games were often rained out. Another problem was the heat. In July and August, the Houston area is often in the 90s and sometimes even over 100 degrees with extreme humidity. Sitting through 9 innings in that kind of heat can feel like torture. Hofheinz dreamed of a better way to watch baseball, without having to deal with the humidity and rain. And upon taking a vacation to Rome, he came up with a fantastic idea. He took a tour of the Rome Coliseum, saying, quote, "It was a large round facility and most stadiums in the United States had been built to conform to the shape of the playing fields, rectangular. I studied the history of the Coliseum and I found out that on hot days they used to have the slaves pull a cover over the top made out of papyrus or whatever they used in those days. I guess they didn't want to spoil the lion's appetite with too much heat. And I found out too that the emperor and the bigwigs all sat at the top of the stadium. Standing there, thinking back on those days, I figured that a round facility with a cover was what we needed in the United States, and that Houston would be the perfect spot for it." Unquote. Now, it's important to note how revolutionary this idea was. Never before had Major League Baseball ever been played indoors. It was completely unheard of. But nonetheless, Hofheinz and the HSA presented a model of the Dome Stadium to the National League owners, and on October 17, 1960, Houston was awarded an MLB franchise, which was named the Houston Colt 45s. Voters approved an $18 million bond for construction, and construction began on January 3, 1962. Meanwhile, the Colt 45s played their first ever game in the spring of 1962, on April 20th to be precise, which was Hofheinz's 50th birthday. Hofheinz served as the first ever team president. The team played at Colt Stadium while the new venue was being constructed, and the Astrodome was officially completed in November of 1964, 6 months ahead of schedule. The venue was originally called Harris County Domed Stadium, but when the Colt 45s renamed themselves the Astros during the 1964 offseason due to trademark issues with the Colt's firearms company, the new venue was named the Astrodome to reflect the new name. The roof sat 18 stories above the playing surface, which originally was not AstroTurf, but rather real grass. The stadium held 50,000 people with air conditioning units installed that would move 2.5 million cubic feet of air per minute. The stadium was designed for both football and baseball, with the Houston Oilers of the AFL moving into the Astrodome in 1968. The lower seats were designed to be movable in order to switch between the two configurations. The stadium had 6 levels of multicolored seats. The Astrodome was one of the first stadiums ever to have luxury seats, having 53 of them, and all the seats had cushions. The stadium also featured a scoreboard that cost $2 million. It was known as the Astrolight and was 474 feet long in total. The Astrodome also had 5 restaurants located inside the stadium and also featured lucite skylights that were put directly above the natural grass to give it a proper amount of sunlight. But the problem was, during afternoon games, outfielders were blinded by the sun, so 30% of the panels were painted over, but this caused the natural grass to die, and so a new type of artificial turf was installed, which became famous. It is known as AstroTurf, and was soon being used in stadiums all across the United States. The Astros played their first game at the Astrodome on April 9, 1965 in front of 47,000 fans. They won in 12 innings against the New York Yankees. Mickey Mantle of the Yankees got the first hit in the Astrodome as well as the first home run. President Lyndon B. Johnson and his wife Lady Bird were in attendance for this game, as well as the 39th governor of Texas, John Connally. President Johnson would later shake the hand of Hofheinz and pay his respects to the man. Hofheinz gave the president a special seat in his luxury box, high above right field. The Astrodome was quickly given the title of the eighth wonder of the world. In 1966, the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo began being held at the Astrodome. It is considered the city of Houston's signature event, similar to New Orleans with Mardi Gras or San Diego with Comic-Con. The event is an incredible boost to not just the city's economy, but the state's economy too. Among other things, the event includes a parade, a rodeo, a concert, and a livestock auction where professional breeders can show off their stock and sell them for big money. In 1968, college basketball's game of the century took place between number 1 UCLA and number 2 Houston, both of whom were undefeated. The two teams had met in the NCAA tournament the previous season, which turned out to be a UCLA win, en route to the Bruins winning the national championship. Each team had a star player who would go on to have a professional career in the same city they went to college in. The Bruins had a center named Lou Alcindor, who would later become known as Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who was a Lakers legend. Houston had a star forward by the name of Elvin Hayes, who would end up being the number 1 overall pick in the 1968 NBA draft and would play for the Rockets in the NBA. The game was attended by 52,000 fans. Houston would end up winning by a score of 71-69 in a thrilling matchup. The Houston Oilers began playing at the Astrodome in 1968, and if you want to learn more about the team history of the Oilers, check out my Dead Teams video I did on them. I'll leave a link in the description. The Oilers' first game at the Astrodome was on September 9, 1968, which was a 26-21 loss to the visiting Kansas City Chiefs. The first musical act to play at the Astrodome was Judy Garland, also known as the woman who played Dorothy in the original Wizard of Oz movie. She held a show there on December 17, 1965, and sang for 40 minutes. Tickets for the concert ranged from $1 to $7.50, which today would be about $13 to $75. Elvis Presley performed at the Astrodome 6 times between February and March of 1970, and the venue would go on to host several big-name music acts, such as the Rolling Stones, Madonna, Pink Floyd, Metallica, U2, and more. On September 20th, 1973, one of the most famous tennis matches of all time took place at the Astrodome between Billie Jean King and Bobby Riggs. It would become known as the Battle of the Sexes, and ended with King defeating Riggs, and today is looked back on as a major milestone in the progress in women's athletics. The Astrodome actually somehow had a rainout too, which cancelled an Astros game. This happened on June 15, 1976, when the Astros game against the Pirates at the Astrodome was cancelled, when flooding in the Houston area prevented fans from being able to access the roads and highways that led to the stadium. The two teams ended up eating dinner together on the field. In 1980, one of the wildest publicity stunts in sports history took place at the Astrodome. During the 1980 playoff series between the Astros and the Phillies, a Houston-based sports radio station, KILT-AM, announced that a fan named Astroman was camped on top of the Astrodome. He wouldn't come down until the Astros won a World Series. In reality, Astroman was an employee of the radio station named Denver Griffith. He was given a 6-man tent and a basket and rope to lower down to the field when he needed food, water, or supplies. A telephone was put on top of the Astrodome so that Griffith could communicate with the radio station, and he frequently gave interviews on how he was doing. At one point, Griffith became so desperate for food and water that his mother had to interrupt an Oilers practice to put more supplies in his basket. As I'm sure you can probably guess, Griffith did not stay up there for 37 more years until the Astros won a World Series in 2017. He actually came down 10 days later. I'm not really sure what the bathroom situation was on top of the Astrodome, but I sure do hope they power washed the roof afterwards. On October 15, 1986, the Astros and the Mets played in Game 6 of the NLCS at the Astrodome, which went to 16 innings, and was the longest game in postseason history up to that point. The Mets wound up winning that game 7-6, and that game ended up clinching the series for the Mets too. By the 1980s, the owner of the Oilers, Bud Adams, wanted a new stadium for his team and began threatening to move the team out of Houston if he did not get his way, which began a years-long feud between Adams and the city of Houston. I go over this in more detail in my Houston Oilers video. Check it out if you're curious about the full story. Harris County tried to compromise with Adams and added 10,000 seats to the Astrodome between 1989 and 1990 and replaced the scoreboard with 2 brand new video boards. But Adams was still not satisfied with these efforts to improve the Astrodome, and after years of idle threats, finally made good on his promise to relocate the Oilers, moving them to Tennessee after the 1996 season. But the Oilers wouldn't be the only franchise to abandon the Astrodome. By the 1990s, a trend began to emerge in Major League Baseball of many teams building new ballparks, and the Astros, seeing other clubs getting brand new shiny ballparks with amenities that the Astrodome didn't have, also wanted a new ballpark. Roy Hofheinz had long since passed away, and in the 1990s, the Astros were owned by Drayton McLane Jr., a Texas-based billionaire. McLane was very vocal about wanting a new stadium, as the Astrodome's infrastructure was aging, the seats were far away from the game action, and AstroTurf was well known by then as a poor playing surface that caused a lot of injuries in both baseball and football. But McLane was struggling to convince voters to approve funding for a new stadium and planned to sell the team to Bill Collins, who intended to move them to Northern Virginia. But the sale never ended up happening because McLane got his wish in November of 1996, when voters approved funding for a new stadium in downtown Houston, and a 25-acre plot near Union Station was chosen. The new venue was called Enron Field and today is known as Dakin Park, and construction began on October 30th, 1997 and opened on March 30th, 2000. The Astros played their final game at the Astrodome on October 9th, 1999, which was a postseason loss to the Atlanta Braves in Game 4 of the 1999 NLDS. On April 1st, 2001, WrestleMania X7 was held at the Astrodome, which drew a WWF record crowd of nearly 68,000 fans. Texas native Stone Cold Steve Austin defeated defending WWF champion The Rock, and Houston native The Undertaker won the first of his 3 victories over Triple H. Today, it is considered by wrestling fans to be one of the best WrestleManias of all time. In 2002, the Astrodome gained a new neighbor, and that was NRG Stadium, a 72,000-seat retractable roof stadium that was built to house the NFL's newest expansion franchise, the Houston Texans. 2002 was the last year the Astrodome hosted the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo, as it would be moved to NRG Stadium, and as of this video's release, NRG Stadium has held it every year since, with the exception of 2021, when it was cancelled due to health concerns associated with the coronavirus pandemic. The last concert at the Astrodome was actually held during that same 2002 Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo, when George Strait performed in front of a record crowd of 68,000 fans. On August 31st of 2005, the Astrodome, which at this point had been without a permanent tenant for a few years, was used as an evacuation site for those affected by Hurricane Katrina, housing 25,000 people. By September of 2005, all of those 25,000 were either relocated to other evacuation sites or given housing in North Houston. In 2008, the Astrodome was condemned, being cited for numerous code violations. It was permanently closed and remains that way as of today. However, that's not to say there haven't been many attempts to refurbish the Astrodome and turn it into a usable venue once again. The city of Houston made a bid to host the 2012 Summer Olympics, and the idea was proposed to renovate the Astrodome and use it for the opening and closing ceremonies, as well as Olympic events. However, the International Olympic Committee ended up awarding the 2012 Summer Olympics to London. Plans to turn it into a hotel and another to turn it into a movie production studio were both rejected by Harris County, and to be honest, there were so many code violations that needed to be dealt with that Harris County wasn't really interested in many proposals. In June of 2013, a plan was proposed to Harris County to spend $200 million to renovate the Astrodome and fix the code violations and turn it into an event and convention center. The plan even made it on a ballot, but voters rejected the plan in November of 2013. In 2016, the Astrodome Revitalization Project was introduced, which was seeking to renovate the Astrodome and turn it into a massive parking garage. On September 27, 2016, Harris County approved the first part of the plan. This was good news for those who feared that if something wasn't done quickly, it would be demolished. But those fears were quashed anyway, when mere months later, in January of 2017, the Texas Historical Commission voted unanimously to make it a state antiquities landmark, protecting it from ever being demolished without a permit from the same commission. On February 13, 2018, a $105 million renovation plan was approved by Harris County, and the renovations were set to start in October of 2018 and be completed sometime in 2020. The plan was to turn the Astrodome into a parking garage, as previously mentioned. However, October of 2018 came and went with no construction taking place, and it wasn't until almost a year after that we would get an update. In September of 2019, it was announced that plans were put on hold, and there was no word given as to when construction would start. But 2 months later, in November of 2019, newly appointed County Commissioners Judge Lena Hidalgo ruled to scrap the plans completely. Hidalgo explained that in her opinion, the renovations wouldn't have yielded a usable structure for anything. And that brings us to the current day. As of this video's release, no more renovation plans have been proposed, and the Astrodome still stands as of today, but cannot be demolished. So although I guess not technically a dead stadium, it definitely is on life support. And it doesn't really seem like it will be used for anything, and it will probably stay standing long after this world turns into an apocalyptic wasteland like in the movie WALL-E. Rarely do we see a sports venue that has stayed standing for 60 years like the Astrodome has. That's a lot of history. That's millions of people making memories. That's hundreds of thousands of hours of fun experiences that people get to remember forever. That's endless stories that can be passed on to children, grandchildren, and even great-grandchildren. A stadium isn't just a stadium at the end of the day. It's almost a living, breathing organism. It had life. It had energy. And the Astrodome was one of the most vibrant of them all. From the brightly colored seats to the beautiful skylights, it holds a place among the great venues of yesteryear, and no one can ever take that away, no matter what its fate ends up being. If you liked this video, leave a like. If you hated it, leave a dislike. And consider subscribing. I'm almost to 1,000 subs now, and boy do I appreciate this support. Anyway guys, peace out.
Never ever find the right words, and there's no way this is real life. There's no telling you're the right girl, so I can only say that it feels right. It feels right, it feels right. Yeah, I can only say that it feels right. It feels right, it feels right. Yeah, I can only say that it feels right.